Hi everyone. Today's tutorial we're going to be looking at creating this audio reactive Petri dish sort of visual, which is mostly just a React diffusion type of visual that's pretty common in Touchdesigner. As always, we're going to be doing this from a beginner's approach, trying to create a rather complex look with as few nodes as possible, and going over each of them as in depth as we can to sort of make sure we are understanding what we're actually doing. Very quickly before I jump in, I just want to address sorry for the lack of content lately. I have a few videos ready to be posted, but due to some other reasons with it conflicting with other content and all this stuff, I haven't posted them yet. So that's why I'm here recording this video today. Sort of just made up this very quick React diffusion tutorial because I haven't done one of these on my YouTube yet. But I'm excited, to show it off. And if people like this, please give me feedback. And I'm always looking for more ideas to teach people, especially if it is beginner friendly. So let's go ahead and delete this entire network so you can start from scratch. And it should also be worth noting that this file as it is available for download on my Patreon, link in description, just a few bucks a month, and you get every single file I've ever put out. Cool. All right, so we have a blank network. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a noise. So if we press tab and grab a noise top, you can type in noise like so. We sort of want to customize this to be the foundation of our React diffusion. So it sort of is like the spawn point, if that makes sense. So you don't need to copy the numbers that I exactly do, but I'm going to turn the period up a little bit just so we have some bigger blobs. I'm then, oh, sorry if you're hearing some sounds, I'm going to go and do not disturb. There we go. Awesome. So sorry about that. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure we turn monochrome off. That will allow us to get like 3D displacement, giving us a bit more depth to our reaction. And then everything else we can leave as is. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this noise from simplex to Perlin just to get a bit of a nicer, more smoothed out look. And then finally, I want to make sure I set my resolution. So in this tutorial, our resolution is just going to be carried forward from the base node. So when you click the common tab up the top right here, you can set your resolution with these drop downs. The free version of Touchdesigner is limited to 1280p, but in this case I'm going to do a landscape one, so 1920 by 1080, and I can press D to sort of see what's going on in that node. Cool, so the first foundational part of our React diffusion is creating a feedback loop. So let's connect this noise top to a feedback. Now I'm not going to describe feedback too in depth in today's tutorial, so I recommend searching it up if you haven't done it before. But essentially we're going to create a displace look, so we're going to displace this noise against each other, which is how we get that movement, and then add a bit of an edge so it like overlays constantly. So let's go ahead and grab a displace node like so, and then we can plug our feedback into the first input here on the left hand side, so the source image one when we hover over it. Next I'm going to set the extend to mirror like so, and then keep everything else and then bring the source midpoints to 0. And in this case, we're going to change the vertical source, and we will do this in another node, from blue to green. And the reason we're doing that is when we're working with 2D planes, our XY position is converted to red and green lookups when we're doing sort of displacements. It's not important that you understand that, but it becomes more useful when you're doing like depth map or instancing data later on. Cool. Okay, so now we just need to do the second input. So from this feedback, let's go ahead and connect in so let's grab a slope like so, and then drag a connection like that. A slope is basically going to let us control the strength of the displacement going forward. But what is really important with the slope is similar to the displace, we want to change red to be horizontal. So green, we want to be vertical luminance, like so. And in this case, blue, we only have two channels, 2D plane, RG. So we don't want blue, so we can set that to 0. I hope that makes sense. We're also going to turn the strength up to 4, just so we have a stronger displacement, and like the displace, let's bring the 0 point down to 0 just so everything is harmonized. Cool. So from the slope, let's go ahead and create our blobs. So to get that really blobby look, we want to blur out our image. So let's just connect in a blur. Now, this is a part where you can sort of pick what you want. Basically, the smaller the blur, the like more detailed the React diffusion might be, but it also might end up tripping a feedback loop that just nullifies it all. I'll try to demonstrate that later on, but for now, I'm going to make this filter quite big, which is how we get those nice bigger blobs and like longer movements. So I've just turned that up to 32 by dragging that slider all the way up. Next, I'm going to connect in a little bit of noise. This noise is just going to, again, give us a bit more of a differential to what the input is. So we're displacing the input against the output. We want them to be reasonably similar, but not too different from one another. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we plug our blur into both of the inputs. The second input here is a noise coordinate map. So the noise is going to then be mapped to what the input is rather than generating from scratch. Then in this noise, let's go ahead and make sure we turn that to Perlin as well. The seed doesn't matter, but what does matter is we make the period very, very, very small, so we have a very, very slight amount of noise being applied, if that makes sense. So in this case, I'm going 0.0001, so very, very small. We can then keep the harmonics the same. We'll bring the harmonic gain down as well to 0.01, just a very small amount. The amplitude, we're going to do the exact same, copy this period and throw that in there. And we'll just bring the offset down to 0. And then, once again, monochrome turn off. Now, another important step is that we want this displacement to not be static. So we don't want just the same noise overlaid infinitely. So under the Transform tab, we have in Translate. And if I demonstrate the Translate, for those that don't know, just going back to my first noise, you don't need to copy me. If I drag this to the right, you can see it scrolls to the left and right. And if I drag it on the Y, it goes up and down. So if I drag it in the Z, it's going to look like it's just morphing in a crazed pattern. And that's because we don't have a Z placement. So it's sort of moving back and forth like an ultrasound, if you would imagine. So we want to animate that on our second noise here. The way we do that is we go to the third tab here, and we type in ABS, which stands for absolute, not super important to know that. Then we do dot time with a capital T, and then seconds. Sorry, I've misplaced the dot. Let me say that again. So ABS, and then no dot, time, and then dot seconds. So we get the absolute time, and we're referencing the seconds variable of that parameter. And then when we press enter, you'll see it starts ticking up infinitely. Yeah, awesome. So that's pretty much it. And we can connect this into our displace like so. And you'll see like these slight little blobs, but this will become important once we've actually connected the feedback loop. For now, I'm going to leave the displacement as is, but it's important to note that we're going to come back to this displace weight here. And change this later on, as this is where the audio reactivity part will be in this instance. I might change this to 0.1 just for now, so the diffusion looks nice, but yeah, we'll come back to this. Cool. So from this displace, we then want to connect in a edge. An edge does sort of what you would expect it to do, which is highlights the edge, but in this case, it's very, very hard to see. So what we're going to do is, firstly, we want to make it a very light amount. So in this case, 0.01, like so. And then I want to make sure I toggle this comp over input, which is going to layer this very, very slight edge that we have over the top of our input. And that is essentially our feedback loop. So to close off our feedback loop, and to give a brief explanation, and please, if you don't understand this fully, look it up a little bit later. Look it up online. There's great tutorials out there. Essentially, from the starting point to a designated endpoint, which I'm going to designate right now by connecting a null to the very end. I'm going to name this feedback loop as well. So just FB end. So feedback end. Completely optional step. Very good for just understanding what's going on in your networks. So between this point and now this point, we're creating a feedback loop that is repeating everything in this step frame by frame. So it's constantly layering on itself. Yeah, and then like as it moves through, so we have this noise being displaced, it's like layering on top of each other and just keeps doing it every frame and then fading away with all. That's why we have very, very slight numbers, is because each time it's stacking on top of each other. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry. There's much better explanations out there. But let's go ahead and drag this feedback end onto our feedback node, and you should get this dotted line. And then if we press pause, you'll see we start to get a bit of a liquefied look, which is awesome. Obviously, we still yet to do the final touches to get the more defined blobby look, but for now, this is pretty good. What's another handy tip is for feedbacks, you have this you have this pulse button. When you click it, it just re-triggers it to start from scratch. So it's really good to map this to a key. So let's go over to our chops and grab a keyboard in, like so. And we want to make sure that you can see on default, it's set to the number 1 on your keyboard. So that's perfect. So we want to assign this value to here. And the way we do that is we click this little plus, and then we can click on the feedback, hover over this, select it, so click and drag, and then drop it on the pulse button and the parameters up here in the top right. And now every time we press 1, it should re-trigger our feedback. Really handy for just debugging the effects later on. Cool. So now we have the foundation of what is driving the React diffusion. We want to sort of create a bit of the we want to sort of stylize it and then add in our audio reactivity. So from this feedback end, I'm going to connect in a edge. And this is going to act very similar to what we did just before, except this is just going to be a permanent layer we have over the top. So we'll bring the strength up a tiny bit. Around there is good. And then just make sure we comp over input like so. I've also made one mistake. I've just realized if we go back to the previous edge, we don't want this pre-multiply RGB by alpha turned on. If I then press it, you'll see it just gives us a much more defined React diffusion there, sorry. But for the second edge, we do want to keep that one on, and just so we have a bit of a slight defined edge, you can see when I toggle it on and off what it's doing there. But that will matter mostly later on. So from here, we want to go ahead and grab a bit of add a little bit of depth and texturing to our React diffusion. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a normal map. A normal map is going to give us a bit more of a 3D look. I'm not going to go into depth mapping, but if you've encountered a normal map before, it's exactly as that. And we can leave everything as is. From this normal map, we're going to connect in a noise just before and connect them up, same as we just did. And in this case, we're going to bring the scale right down. So a little hack is if you have a mouse, you can press middle mouse button on the word scale and drag to the left so everything is on 0.1, like so. So it's just a very slight amount of noise that is being scaled. And then on the first tab, we can keep it on simplex this time, not super important. We want to bring the harmonics down. Same with the harmonic spread, everything to about 1. Harmonic gain also, we want to bring this down to maybe around 0.33 is pretty good. Exponent keep the same. Bring the amplitude down so it's not as intense, maybe around 1.6. And then offset, this time let's send it right up. and the rest we can leave as is. Next, we want to then connect this slight amount of 3D displacement that we're doing. It's really hard to see with the like diffusion we have going on in the background. Sorry, but so we want to connect in this layer, and let's go ahead and just grab a noise and do the same. So connect it to both points like so. Then pick a random seed if you want. This is going to be where we determine a lot of color, but we can also come back to this at the end. Let's bring the period right down. Harmonics keep the same. Harmonic spread, I'll bring down to about 1 again. Yeah, 1.1 works. Why not? Harmonic gain, bring that down again, 0.3-ish. Exponent, I'll bring this up a little bit, but these numbers I'm picking right now are based on just me earlier dragging these figures around to find a sort of nice color, so they're not super important to copy. And then we turn monochrome off because we want to get a nice little wee rainbow color. And essentially now we just want to combine these back in, and then all we'll have left to do is do an audio reactivity. So let's grab a comp. So if I type in the word comp, it's short for composite, which has a bunch of different combining operations. In this case, we'll keep it on the default multiply and just drag these in like so. And then connect our A null. I'm going to name this BG for background, and then just press D, and then press 1 again, and we can see our reactive fusion. Now this is looking a little bit wrong, so I'm just going to take a second to double check where I've gone wrong and what step I've missed out. Apologies. Okay, I'm back. This is why a lot of people do a lot more professional and scripted and prepared tutorials on YouTube, but also, I don't know, I like my very workshop and figure it out as we go sort of style. So apologies for that, but let's go ahead and figure out what I missed, as it's some really small but really important things, and you can see like we got such a big difference between the two things. So the very first thing is that on this base noise, so let's go back to the very start here. Let's make sure we set this pixel format to 32-bit RGBA. On default, I just believe uses the 8-bit one. 32-bit format for a various of multiple different contexts, like if you're doing instancing and want to use like between 0 and 1 values, you want to set it to 32-bit, and the same for like more detailed projects. Won't go into too much of the behind the scenes, but important to try to always remember to set your pixel format to 32-bit float is usually the rule, but there are many exceptions, especially in more complicated tutorials, to that rule. The next thing is arguably one of the most important parts of a feedback loop is having a level. So the level did not exist there. What I did is, and you want to copy this now, is right click this feedback, type in the word level, and that will insert a level between the displace and the second displaced input. It's really important for this input that we turn the clamp off so it doesn't clamp any of the values coming in, which is just like artificially limiting it. And then additionally on the post tab, we want this opacity to be very slightly transparent so it doesn't infinitely stack upon itself, nullifying the feedback loop. So I'm going to set the opacity to 0.999, so very slightly less than 1. Finally, that's pretty much like, so if I press, oh, I have the initial noise selected. So you can see now it is doing much more of what we expected. I've just disabled this noise here. So this noise here, there's a lot of different ways to get the color to be quite nice. The first thing I forgot is to scale the noise down. So right now it's like repeating a lot. We just want a bit of a singular color. So similar to the noise above it, let's bring the scale down to 0.1 for all the channels. So we get much more of a softer transition between each of them. And then on the output as well, on default, it'll be input times noise. In this case, we just want the, want to use noise as we're mapping it as well. So we don't need to have the backgrounds present. And yeah, that is essentially it for our React diffusion, and you can see we get this quite nice blobby look. The final thing you might have missed is if we come back to this blur, we kept the pre-shrink at about 1, so yours might look like this right now. And let's bring this pre-shrink up to 4. And then keep the filter size around 32. As I mentioned earlier though, this blur is one of the points where if you want to start to craft something a little bit different, you can see here we can change the blur, and it doesn't blur the input shape as much, which gives us much more smaller individual reactions, and it's really just up to your taste. So at this point, I highly recommend playing around with mostly this noise here. We can go through the seed to generate different base palettes, like so. So you can pick one you want. And then the exponent, amplitude, and offset is a really good way just to increase the color hue, or play with the different color hues. So if you bring the exponent down, you can see we get the like much more dramatic colors, and amplitude as well will like fade it out or make the color much more intense, etc., etc. But I'm going to leave that as is, as I quite like it as it is. Finally, you also might want to, for this edge, if I disable it, you can see we have much softer edges. But if I bring this back on, you can bring the strength up, and additionally you can also change the color of the edge as well if you would like. But I'm really happy with how this is looking, so all that's left to do is make this audio reactive. And if you're reasonably well versed in Touchdesigner, you might already be able to put it together. I also put this displace weight back to 1, but that doesn't matter as we're going to change this anyway. But you can see if you just keep these two at 1 on the displace, it's quite nice. So let's go ahead and go to our chops and get an audio file in. If you want to do any audio activity with your Spotify or a device in, I have a tutorial for internal audio routing, so look that up. Otherwise, we're just going to use the default file today. So from this audio file, if you want to listen to it, connect in a audio device out. This might be kind of loud, warning. Alright, just going to disable that. So disable or bypass that by clicking this arrow like so. Next, in the top left, we have our palette. If we go to our tools, we have a bunch of pre-made, really useful tools. One of them is audio analysis, and we can literally just drag and drop that one in like so. Now we can connect our audio file into this, and then from the output, we can grab a select. So the first output here. And you can see it's automatically reacting to our low. We're only going to use our low today, but if you want to interact with this tool, you can click the plus and then tweak some of the values as so. To start off with, I'm just going to apply this as is, and then we're going to refine it from there. So the way that I do that is we want to have our displace selected, and then click the plus on the select and drag this low, so you can see we can hover over it onto the displace weight, either or both. If I show you just, if I do both, you can see it's like going to be a lot more of an intense kind of look, like so. But in fact, I don't actually mind that. And in fact, we can use this to start sculpting. So this is a bit of like a maybe thought experiment, or like a way of like trying to train your brain to like how to use Touchdesigner. So when I look at something like this, immediately I'm like, okay, I don't like how jumpy it is. I want it to have a consistent movement and also pulse in a lot more smoother way. So if we go to our audio analysis, we can see for the low, we have a bunch of useful tools or sliders here. Firstly, our threshold, I don't mind where it's at because this is the default setting. So I don't want to like raise the threshold, which will make it less sensitive to low sound. So like kicks and bass. And I don't want to lower it, making it more sensitive, so I'll keep that as is. What I do want is this add. So this add is a pre-add value, so it can add negative or positive values, which will mean that rather than starting from 0, you can see all the bass inputs are 0, it will make the bass input higher. For example, if I drag the mid add up and toggle it on, you can see it doesn't go beneath like now a higher value. So I can toggle that back off. So for the add on the low, if I drag this up slightly, you'll see that it has a consistent movement throughout. And in fact, I want to have even more consistent movement. So I'm going to bring that add up even more, like so. Just so it's constantly moving. But now I don't think it's really pulsing enough, so I might bring the gain up, which is going to make the amplitude of the noise reaction go higher. So yeah, I feel like that's pulsing a nice amount. And then finally, smoothness will just make the operator a lot smoother, or the reaction to the kick a lot smoother. And if I have a look at this with the music unmuted, yeah, I have a really, really nice movement there. Smooth movement there. And it also looks really nice, not being too jarring at all. So yeah, I'm going to leave today's tutorial there. I hope this wasn't too complicated. Feedback is really welcome. Trying to, keep up doing these tutorials. If there are any more complicated topics, I'm also interested in exploring those sort of videos, but I probably won't walk through them as detailed. Otherwise, thank you for 10,000 subscribers. Something special coming for that soon. And yeah, join the Discord below. Drop me a message on Instagram if you want to reach me. Other than that, have a lovely day, and I'll catch you on the next one, guys. See y'all.